and welcome to another edition of The Blueprint, Canada's Conservative podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Schmale, Member of Parliament for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, broadcasting live from my constituency office in the beautiful town of Lindsay, Ontario. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, please remember to like, share, subscribe, comment, help us push back against the ever-moving Liberal agenda. We have a great show lined up for you. As always, in the second half of the show, we're going to talk to Raquel Dancho. She is the Member of Parliament for Kildonan St. Paul in the beautiful province of Manitoba. She is going to talk about some of the student funding announcements that were revealed by the Prime Minister last week. But first, we have a Member of Parliament from Alberta. Edmonton Manning is the riding. His name is Ziad Aboultaif. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me, Jamie, and I hope you're staying safe. You look good, by the way.
Well, thank you. As do you. You had a longer beard last time I saw you, so
yeah,
it looks like the playoff season's over for you.
Yeah. Hopefully soon.
We're going to quickly talk about digital government and how important this plays a role in what we're trying to accomplish right now, which is keeping people in place while we try to plank the curve, if you will. But how we get back into the economy, how we roll back into action is key, and how we do it safely. But how digital government can play a big role in this.
Yes, I mean, it would be nice to just shed in the light on what's digital government. So, digital governments encompass everything tied to government's presence in the online world. So that includes services, privacy for Canadians, and maintaining government technology in line with today's solution. So right now, with the epidemic, I think there's no more important time to have fully digitized government than now, because that's going to help, first of all, the government to connect to people quickly, to make sure the awareness of the epidemic and all the updates are easily getting to Canadians on spot. And third, to be able to help the economy to get back to normal at the time where we know that coming back is going to be slow, and that's going to hurt us every day before we become fully engaged as an economy and putting all Canadians back to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's important to also look at in this role of digital government is during the pandemic that we're seeing right now. And by the way, your province of Alberta, just over 4,600 cases, well over 49,000, almost 50,000, well, actually 49,025 as of today across the country, at least 40,000 of those in the provinces of Ontario and Quebec combined. But as we roll out these programs, whether it be CERB, the wage subsidy, what have you, high-speed internet and the access to reliable high-speed internet and cellular service also becomes a big question, because a lot of Canada, there's a lot of rural areas, a lot of space where residents are not covered by adequate service.
True. That's also part of the full digitization of our system. And we must recognize and realize that we are way behind other countries, at least similar economies around there. So if I'm to compare Canada to New Zealand first, or to United Kingdom, or to Estonia, okay, there's some governments out there that fully digitize, some societies are fully digitized. Canadians in general have one of the highest rate of using technologies in the world. The government is the one who's falling behind. And that is a dilemma. And we are not even at 10% readiness compared to where we should be at 50, 60% right now, working toward to be fully digitized maybe in 5 years. Now we're nowhere near that. And the government seemed to be very quiet on this since day one, this portfolio, at least with this new government.
Now, when you're talking about the digital government and the movement towards it, is there a country in your mind that you use as a benchmark that you want to hit?
Yes, New Zealand is one of them. Estonia is another one. But if I'm to take a perfect example, it will be United Kingdom. Okay, we almost started at the same point. They're sitting right now about 55 to 60% to, on their goal, but we are sitting at 10%. So there's a big gap here to be filled, and it has to be a priority of any government to be able to improve that and to be able to achieve that goal, because we can never expect our economy to cope with the rest of the challenges that's coming in the next years without having the digitization in place.
Now, do you find, if when we move to this, and I agree with you that we need to, do you see efficiency? I know government and efficiencies is hard to put in the same sentence, but do you see government becoming a little more efficient when that happens?
Well, they have to be. Right now, we're very bureaucratic at every aspect of government, in specific at digital. I'll give you an example. Right now, if for every 3 or 4 employees in Canada, there's one technician. Okay. If I'm to be generous, I'll say for every 8. Okay. While for private sector, for every 60, 90, 100 people, there's one technician. So you can imagine that for 300,000 public employees, we have close to 50,000 people that work in the technology in order to be able to support the system. That is by nature very bureaucratic, very costly, and that's also standing in the way to allow us to improve quickly and to be able to fully digitize. You could be aware of that the government is in business of making softwares. The government should not be in business of making softwares. The government should allow the private sector to engage more, to be able to bring the solutions that's in the market, so we can speedily, or we can speed up the process to be able to fully digitize.
Now, as we move to the kind of the gradual reopening of the economy, is there an area this can play a role in terms of speed, maybe getting the timeline sped up? Because we do know that when people are locked down, this is how they were operating. But if this ever happens in the future, this should be like a warning sign to say, yes, we need to move quickly on this, because by what you're saying, the Liberals haven't pushed their foot on the gas, so to speak.
Yeah, well, there's no secret. The technology sector is going to be one of the most top 3 maybe sectors that is going to get our economy up to speed. And this is a great opportunity right now to engage that sector more, to encourage more the opportunities across the countries. As you know, we have a few hubs in Canada. One of them is in Ottawa, Kanata, in Kitchener. Edmonton is one of them. We need to encourage that more, because we can employ more Canadians, getting back this on track, and actually make the government leaner, so it's more efficient, it's more cost effective, and then we can start to look at the reasonable goals to achieve the result that we're looking for.
Now, businesses all across the country are hurting. I think you've been hearing that in your writing. It's no secret. What are you hearing from your constituents that they're saying, that they're recommending, in order that we get back up and running and back to normal, so to speak?
Well, I mean, the business community are fearing that the longer this is going to take, the longer it's going to take them to get back to normal. So they're fearful over how their people are going to go back to normal life, to be able to hit those shops and to hit those services, so they can so the business volume can come back to normal. Okay, so there's fear among the business community. The other thing is the sentiment of people getting paid. They don't want to necessarily go back to work, because they could probably making more money sitting home than going back to work. That's another big dilemma we're facing. Okay. So third is nobody have any idea right now where things are going without a government plan. We know the government has not rolled out the plan. The provinces are working on it, but the government hasn't done any of that. just paying money here and there for everyone. So that's also is gonna, in my opinion, is going to slow down the recovery period that we're looking for. And the businesses, every day goes by, their fear is higher and higher of maybe shutting down or going bankruptcy, and that's definitely bad news.
Now that the crisis is ongoing for a couple months now, I think it's important to remember, and maybe you can touch on this as well, that the debt and deficits that the federal government is running, and rightfully so, they need to do something to help Canadians get through this, especially when they're told to shelter in place. All of this money will have to be paid back at some point. We'll see higher taxes, maybe service cuts, depending on how this rolls out, but also the fact that we continue to print money, basically out of thin air, creating money to pay our bills.
There's a lot of fear out there. I've been contacted by so many just average Canadian or business owners. They're calling and saying where the money is going to come from. We know that the government is printing money like every week like crazy, and people are aware, and they know that there will be more taxation coming, that life will be more expensive, and they have that fear too. In addition to losing jobs or losing businesses or having difficulties to cope with day-to-day life. So a lot of people are looking into this in a very careful way. A lot of people are questioning whether they will be eligible to get paid, whether they should even claim those money, because they know that this is going to add to the debt, and that means the debt service is going to be huge, and then we could run to credit rating problems as a country, and the currency could be at risk by getting less value on the world market and the exchange market. So all those together are worries that piling up in addition to the current worries that Canadians have right now. Speaking at least in Edmonton, Manning.
Do you see a need to ensure a stable market for investors as we return to normal, as the world kind of picks back up, to show that investors, Canada is a safe market to put their money? Because my fear is that under this current Liberal government, they have made investing in this country in a number of sectors, including oil and gas, in some cases mining, very difficult. And when limited dollars are available, those dollars might go to jurisdictions that have more certainty in their regulatory process, leaving Canada further behind and slower to recover.
100%, you're hitting also on a very, very important point here. The sentiment of investment and business communities not very encouraged, at least for the last 5 years, to come back and invest money. We know that in Alberta more than any other place, maybe in the country. So the news for getting those investments back into place, getting the business to come and invest in Canada, business people feel that there's a lot of roadblocks, there's a lot of red tapes, and the government is not encouraging at all. The message of the government hasn't been encouraging at all. Okay, so therefore we're going to experience dryness in the investment coming this way, beside the losses that we had last 3 years or 5 years, which is account to over $100 billion, at least in Alberta alone. So that's going to also be added to the economic dilemma that we're going to experience.
Ziad, any parting words before we let you go?
Well, I want to thank you for a great show and for very professional. I hope that we go back to normal. Life in Canada goes back to normal, and Canadian will overcome this as soon as possible, because we have so much at risk to fight, and we must be working together, united, and focused to be able to get out of this.
Thank you very much, Ziad Aboultaif. This is the second time You've appeared on this show the first time in the previous Parliament, the first time in this one, so I do appreciate your time. You're the Member of Parliament for Edmonton Manning. You're also the Shadow Minister for Digital Government. I know you're busy again. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up in the second half in a couple of minutes' time, so I do invite you to stick around. We have Raquel Dancho. She's the Member of Parliament for Kildonan St. Paul. We're going to talk to her about some of the announcements being made by the Prime Minister in regards to students and some of the support programs. So remember, low taxes, less government, more freedom. That's the blueprint. Stick around. Welcome back to the second half of the Blueprint, Canada's Conservative podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Schmale, Member of Parliament for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock, in the beautiful province of Ontario. I'm broadcasting from my constituency office in Lindsay. Now, we had a great episode with Ziad Aboultaif in the first half to talk about digital government. As promised, we have another amazing MP, the Member of Parliament for Kildonan St. Paul in Manitoba. She's also the Shadow Minister for Diversity, Inclusion and Youth, Raquel Dancho. Thank you very much for appearing on the second time on this show. That is pretty amazing.
Oh, thank you for having me a second time. I wasn't sure if I was going to get an invite after the first, but
well, either that or you're a sucker for punishment. I don't know, but well done. And great job to your province controlling the number of confirmed cases in Manitoba. At last count, you have 272. So well done. Hopefully you are bringing that number down even further and allowing life to kind of get back to normal, whatever that is.
We hope.
So we invited you on because over the past couple of weeks and months, we've had a number of support programs for individuals, for businesses, and now the latest announced last week was for students. And maybe do you want to quickly go over that, what the Prime Minister has unveiled?
Yeah, sure. So last Thursday, the Prime Minister unveiled $9 billion worth of supports for students specifically. And there was a number of measures, the two keystone ones, and one of them is getting quite a bit of attention, is the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. It's designed much like the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which was $2,000 a month for those eligible. This is $1,250 to $1,750 a month for those eligible who are students. The extra $500 is dependent on if you have dependents or if you have disabilities. And then the second keystone piece was a Canada Student Service Grant, which, from what we understand, although there's been very few details provided, and the department was unable to answer just even basic questions on this, but it appears to be designed as a volunteer program to incentivize students to volunteer in essential service work, what they describe as national service. And then they could be eligible to receive up to $5,000 for their fall education. And then there was another other top-ups to various grant programs that already exist.
I have a few questions on this program, on the student program. There's a number of parts to it that kind of tweaked my interest. Specifically, as we talk about, and Premier Ford in Ontario announced a plan to reopen the economy. Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, British Columbia, Alberta, all provinces have kind of come out with a staged plan to safely and responsibly open up the government. So in my area in particular, there's a lot of tourism sector, and the summer tourist season is small to begin with. It's really tight, so we want to be able to capitalize on those dollars. And as these businesses are told to reopen and get back up to running, the labor that they use is oftentimes students. So how does this program encourage students to go to work, which is largely the workforce used in tourist areas, when this program is paying them to stay at home?
That is an excellent question, and we've been unable to receive any real response from government. And there's even beyond our party, there's concerns that this will not incentivize work. $1,250 a month is a lot of money. I'm sure when you were a student, that would have been, I know for me, that would have been a considerable amount of money to receive for doing nothing. I guess the idea is that because many of these jobs, restaurant jobs, for example, have been temporarily, we hope, eliminated, that this offsets those folks who are planning to work in those industries that have been temporarily closed. So I understand that. But on the other hand, I know myself, I'm sure you're the same. I started working summer jobs when I was 14 years old and worked throughout university, even the school year. But it would have been a heck of a lot easier, pardon me, but to just, relax all summer, no exams, no stress, maybe you live at home, maybe your parents are happy to let you relax for the summer before you start, say, your first university year. And, Jamie, we're hearing actually just in the last couple of days, and it's incredibly alarming, that small businesses, particularly in the tourism sector, but also agriculture and others, I think I just heard of an ice cream shop who's had planned to hire 20 students, and already 4 of them had said, oh, don't worry about it, I don't need the job anymore. And we've heard about this across the country from many of our MPs. They're hearing from constituents. So the impact on businesses to already reopen is challenging, let alone if they're unable to hire their student workforce. And the government has provided us no details whatsoever of what's going to happen if too many students opt to stay home for the summer. I think we deserve answers on this.
Yeah, I think a lot of businesses are looking for answers because they've been hurt, and many, through no fault of their own, have been told to shut down and wait, and they're anxious to get back. Yeah, for weeks they're anxious to get back up and running. They want to do that, but the workforce, in a lot of cases, they're being basically told to stay home, and that presents yet another challenge. Life as a small business owner is not easy to begin with. Putting more roadblocks in their way is not exactly encouraging more people to go into business.
Exactly. I worked in restaurants and in retail and in sales, and I can tell you sometimes it's pretty challenging to get up and go and deal with, say, cranky customers, or I've done many labor jobs as well. It's a hot summer day, you're wiping the sweat from your brow. You'd rather be at the beach, but you need to earn a living and you need to develop your skills. So in my opinion, and I've said this to the Minister of Employment, Carla Qualtrough, on Friday during the HUMA committee, what is the incentive for students to work during this? And she didn't have an answer. So that to me is very concerning. But I also wonder, how do we do this so that we can give some students some leeway, but also ensure that they are motivated to work? Well, we proposed a pretty great solution to some of the problem, I believe. You've, of course, heard about the agriculture labor shortages that are just really impacting our country across the board in many, many agriculture and agri-food sectors. So Conservatives, we saw unemployed, able-bodied young people full of life and energy, and we saw labor shortages picking apples and in other agriculture industries as well. And we thought, well, why not put them together and have, young guys, young gals get out there and work on a farm this summer? It's rounding out their resume. It's providing them skills on better work ethic and expanding their reach, and it'll earn them some income. And so I thought that was a pretty innovative solution that we had. And it's been fairly well received, I have to be honest. And I think that students have a moral obligation to contribute meaningfully to our response effort during this pandemic. And I get the sense that many of them want to, and yet this incentive is disincentivizing them from doing so. One person raised the point to me that, if you're working at a restaurant and you can only earn up to $1,000 to receive this benefit, let's say, you're approaching that issue, you're going to hit $1,000 tonight. So, you got to clock out at 9 p.m. But let's say that restaurant's blessed, they've reopened and they've had a rush. Well, you got to go home at 9 p.m. You can't take those 2 extra hours or you're going to lose your $1,250. And that's just a tiny example of how small businesses could be impacted by this. I have students as well who want to work more hours, but they're going to receive a bigger clawback if they do. So there's a lot of questions with this legislation.
I think you and I agree that farm work is one of the most noble of trades. Not only that, you're feeding your community and your country, but look at all the other pros, right? You get to you don't need to go to the gym because you're getting a workout for free. You're getting you're working on your tan. You're outdoors.
You're getting rid of that COVID-19, so to speak.
Yes, you're getting your physical activity. You're learning about nature, how to fix things.
That's right.
I use common sense. So I think farming, despite what some in the national media think, farming is the most noble of trades, and we thank all those producing that food that we do like to eat and have on our tables. One thing that I do want to talk about too is the part you mentioned about volunteering. Now there's a fund announced that covers those who volunteer. I think you said in the national interest, in the national service.
National service, yes.
So, maybe you can clarify that, because I'm told volunteering is you don't expect to be paid. That's my.
A whole new level of entitlement on this one, I think. But I understand the genesis of the idea. Giving back to the community, I guess the idea is that, well, I'll start with this. So I'd asked the department officials in the Department of Employment, what does national service mean? What is that? Is that going to be determined by provinces, what they deem to be essential services, which we know varies across the country? Is some Liberal MP going to be deciding which volunteer opportunities are valid and which are not? What is the paperwork? Do these charities and others have the capacity to fill out the paperwork? There's so many questions about this, number one. But number two, you're right. I mean, we're supposed to volunteer out of the goodness of our hearts to also build skills and give back to the communities where we see the need. So you would think that that would be the case here, but I can understand this is almost their alternative so that they can say, pardon me, but in my opinion, well, we do have this work volunteer program for students. So, but the problem is there's way more details on the student benefit and no details available for the Canada Student Service Grant. So their priority of getting students to volunteer work for their $5,000 school subsidy in the fall, the government isn't paying nearly as much attention to that as they are to the student benefit. So we can see where their priorities really are. So that to me is quite concerning. If we're going to be offering this service grant, we need to have those details as soon as possible so we can mobilize the volunteer organizations in our communities to apply for student volunteers. And yet this isn't happening.
With any government program that's announced, it doesn't matter what it is or which party is in power. What you don't want to create is a dependence on government where when you have to scale it back, because as we spoke about in the first half with Ziad, we're literally printing money to pay our bills. So we're deficit spending, we're adding to our debt like you wouldn't believe, but we have to do that. So that is something understandable when people are told to shelter in place.
It's a crisis, yeah.
Yeah, in a crisis. So it's that dependence on government you don't want to start out, because it's very difficult to break.
I think you make a good point. I think what is the Milton Friedman said, there's no such thing as a temporary government tax. Well, I would argue there's probably no such thing as a temporary government welfare subsidy. We haven't seen a rollback of many of these subsidies really ever that I can think of. And I'm just very concerned that these subsidies are going to be in place for a long time. And, the fact is, Jamie, that it's difficult to incentivize work in the first place. We already bring in 60,000 foreign workers for our agriculture sector alone every single year. And now we're having major problems bringing just that amount in. So I think there needs to be a broader conversation about it. And maybe as we come out of this crisis, that's the time to have it. What is the expectation of our populace? In my opinion, and I think in the opinion of the great Margaret Thatcher, if you're able-bodied, you must work. And I think that's what we should be expecting of ourselves and of our neighbors. If you're able to, particularly our young people, you should be out there contributing. And not to give all students a bad rap. I think that there's a lot of students who agree with us and do want to work.
100%.
And I even had a construction company in my riding I spoke to the other day that said they'd hired like half a junior A hockey team because they couldn't play summer hockey. They are full of energy. They're strong. So what's it to them to, lay concrete and dig and do that physical labor? It keeps them fit and earns them some money. And so a perfect example of students is stepping up to the plate to contribute to small business and to the local economy. So, we see so many examples. So I'd really like to focus, of course, on those. But the drain is when students are going to be sitting at home. And, I'll just say as well, I think parents would be pretty disappointed, or have been. We've certainly heard some feedback already that their kids will perhaps be sitting at home on the couch playing video games or on Instagram all summer when they should be out working. But what are their parents going to do? The kids just have to go online and get $1,250 within a couple hours. So how do we do this? How do we do this? I'm not sure, but I would hope that the government, and I'll say the biggest disappointment to me was the lack of communication when they announced these supports, of the expectation that students seek work as much as possible, and in the very last circumstance should they apply for this. I think that should have been the messaging, and there was not an ounce of that in the announcement.
I agree with you that I think the vast majority of students do agree with us. They want to get back to work. They want to get life back to normal. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. The problem I see with this program, as we phase in the economy, and employers need this labor in order for them to offer their product or service, is the market distortions that are going to have to happen if this program continues, because employers are going to have to offer even more money for the students to come off the government program, which means the product or service, the end price the consumer is going to pay, is going to have to go up to cover that increased cost of labor, which means, of course, less buying power for the middle class.
Exactly. No, exactly. If you can't find students to flip the burger, serve the ice cream. This is a classic example. I did this for many years in high school during summertime. There you go. Yeah, I've worked in 6 restaurants in my life. So it's tough work. It's literally backbreaking work by the end of a 15-hour rush shift. So, but if we do reopen the economy, which assuming we are, as you mentioned, a number of provinces are taking very good measures to make strong, safe plans. That is the problem. If you are a business and a restaurant is on the end of your rope, you're going to go bankrupt, but hallelujah, the government's allowing me to reopen. My customers are coming back, but no waiters. So what are we going to do? How are we going to serve our clientele? Well, it's a really good question. I think that there is a responsibility on the government to answer this. There are going to be so many economic impacts from this we don't even know, or at least we don't think that they know, because they're not giving us any of that information. So I think there is a responsibility of our elected officials at the federal level in government to answer these economic impact questions.
We don't have much time left, but you touched on something I want to quickly bring up. You talked about restaurants. Now, that's one industry that is going to have to see changes to its model. I'm already seeing articles, I'm sure you have too, that have mentioned that restaurants are going to have to go down to 50% capacity in order to accommodate social distancing as we move forward. That, again, affects their model, on their business model. Restaurant margins are already so tight to begin with. This is going to make it even more challenging, which either means less jobs for serving staff. It could mean higher prices for consumers to pay, which again means shrinking buying capacity within the middle class, and that, or eliminating a class of people altogether from going out to restaurants. So that's another unintended consequences of all of this that we're going through.
No, I would agree. And, something that I found, there's so many inspiring things that have happened during this incredible economic catastrophe that we're in this health catastrophe. But is the fact that, there are many businesses that are still operating, many, in fact. So grocery stores, 7-Eleven, gas stations, things like that. And on their very own, they've met the legislative requirements to stay open. They have innovated. We see grocery stores, they put in plexiglass. There's very clear indicators where you stand, even in the grocery store. There's sort of a flow you have to follow. So private sector, and I'm sure you would agree, we're conservatives. We recognize that the private sector is, our engine of ingenuity. I'm very confident that restaurants will be able to figure this out for sure. Where there's a will, there's a way. And when there's a need, if people want to go out to eat, people will figure out a way to serve them. But at the end of the day, they need those waiters and those waitresses and those cooks and those line chefs to step up to the plate and go to work. So I hope that we don't see the student benefit offsetting that to such a degree that we don't have these small businesses operating. We will have to hold the government to account if that is the case. So let's encourage, I would like to encourage students to step up, go to work, don't take this benefit if you have another option. And let's see what we can do as a country to reopen our economy.
What a way to end the show, Raquel, on a positive note like that. I don't want to jinx it, but any other positive parting words before we let you go?
Jamie, I just really appreciate that you're doing this. I think it's fantastic. I'm an avid listener of podcasts. I'm obsessed. I listen every single morning, and this is one of my new favorites. And I just encourage everyone to subscribe and listen to Jamie Schmale and our conservative colleagues on the regular and get the information of how hard we're working for you on your behalf.
Raquel Dancho, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. The Member of Parliament for Kildonan, St. Paul. But get on time. You're also the Shadow Minister for Diversity, Inclusion, and Youth. I appreciate your time. And as Raquel mentioned, you can, of course, watch us on Facebook or Instagram or other platforms, but you can also listen to us as well. We're on CastBox, we're on iTunes, we're on Google Play, and many other platforms. So we do encourage you to download that and also tell your friends about that, because we need you to like, subscribe, comment, share, and help us push back against the ever-moving liberal agenda. So, thank you, Raquel. Thank you, Ziad. Please join us again. We will have more episodes of The Blueprint to talk about the issues affecting Canadians as we go through this COVID-19 crisis. Remember, low taxes, less government, more freedom. That's The Blueprint. Thanks for joining us.